In the next few videos, we're going to see a number of examples on coding that. When we're first getting started out with Booleans and Boolean expressions and making these things more complicated, maybe using and or, and not, or the bang, the exclamation point we learned in the last video, it really lends itself well to these smaller coding bat-like type problems. So we're going to start out on coding bat. And like I said in the last video, our goal is to achieve this thing we're going to call Boolean Zen. We're going to become one with the Booleans. And I think you'll really see what I mean at the end of this video. So I'm going to start out in warm up 1. By the way, again, you should be on coding bat. You should be logged in. I'm not logging myself in because I already have all the answers because I've done all of these, but you should log yourself in. Let's go to warm up 1, and we're going to do the very first one called sleepIn. And look, we're given a little coding bat puzzle. We're being asked to write a method called sleepIn, and here's what it will do. We have one parameter called weekday, which what type is it? It's a Boolean. It's true if it's a weekday, and a Boolean parameter called vacation. That's true if we're on vacation. And when do we get to sleep in? If it's not a weekday or if we're on vacation, and we're going to return true if we sleep in. Now, I'm going to let you know this now that I'm going to do this problem in a bit of a long way to start and then actually change it a bunch of times to make it better every single time. So even though you might be thinking of a better way that you could do this problem from how I originally start here, just kind of go with me on this journey. Like I said, I'm going to do this about 5 or 6 different times. So let's do this. Let's check if we're on vacation first, because if we're on vacation, we automatically get to sleep in. So if vacation, what type is vacation is, it's a Boolean. So I can check if it equals true. Then do I get to sleep in? Yeah, I do. So I'm asked to return a Boolean here, so let's return true. If I make it to this else, that means I'm not on vacation. So now I have one other parameter that I can check, which is weekday. So let's do this. If weekday equals true, if it is a weekday, do I get to sleep in? I don't think so. So let's return, return false. But if I make it to this else now, I know that I'm not on vacation, but it's also not a weekday, so I think I do get to sleep in. Let's return true. And if you hit go, this should work. Now, there are some improvements for sure that I can make on this code that I just wrote. And the first improvement we actually already know, which is this idea that we learned a couple examples ago, which is if I write an if statement that has one line in it, I actually don't need the curly braces. So let's kind of format this a little bit nicer. So I'm going to get rid of the curly braces here and here. We also know that I can kind of do this with these as well. So I'm going to do this and that. Careful where your indentation is going when you do this. And careful not to keep around any extra curly braces. You'll notice at the end of this, I only have the curly braces that kind of open and close the method. All the others are gone. And now I'm using a cascading if statement instead of a nested if statement. I have else if here. So I can hit go. It should still work. So that's already better. Now, here's where it starts to get kind of more Boolean-y or Boolean Zen-like. Let's look at what's inside of this if statement here. We know that what's inside the parentheses of an if statement is a Boolean. We learned that in the last video. So let's think about what I'm going to call the true falseness of vacation equals true. As in, when is it true and when is it false? Well, when vacation is true, isn't the part that I've highlighted also true? And when vacation is false, isn't the part that I've highlighted also false? So I'm going to say the sentence. It's going to sound a little bit weird, but let it sink in. The true falseness of vacation is the same as the true falseness of the entire Boolean expression that I've highlighted. That's me saying when vacation is true, the whole thing inside the if statement here is true. And when vacation is false, the whole thing inside the if statement here is false. If I have two equivalent Boolean expressions, I can just replace one with the other. So I can replace vacation equals true with just vacation. Kind of nice. Now let's look at this second one, this else if. Doesn't the same hold true here? When weekday is true, this whole thing is true. And when weekday is false, this whole thing is false. So weekday equals true, and weekday are equivalent Boolean expressions, which means I can replace what's in the parentheses with just weekday. And that should still work. Okay, now we're getting even better. Now, let's do one change that right now doesn't feel like it's going to make a whole lot of difference, but it will kind of help us with the step after this, which is I don't really love that this is if something return true, else if return false, else return true. Let's make kind of all of my trues be grouped at the top. So I'm going to have it be if something return true, else if something return true, else return false. I like that pattern a little better. So here, what are we actually checking in the else if is it a weekday? If it's a weekday, I return false. But remember, if it's not a weekday, I return true. How do I do not? Is I can just put an exclamation point in front of this. And then I can change this false to a true and this true to a false. What does the exclamation point mean? It means not. It switches the value of whatever. So what am I looking for here? Now I'm looking for that it's not a weekday. And let's hit go, and that should still work. Now you'll see why I did that for this next step. Here, if it's a vacation, I'm returning true. And if it's not a weekday, I'm also returning true. So don't I return true if I go into this part of the if statement or if I go into this one? Which means I can actually combine these two pieces together using an or. And that's because when do I return true? If I'm on vacation or if it's not a weekday. So let's do this. Grab this and I'm going to combine them with an or. For or, you use the vertical tall lines, which are actually right above your return key or right below your delete or backspace on your keyboard. This should still work. Now, here's my favorite one, which is let me highlight everything inside the if statement right now. When this Boolean expression that I've highlighted inside the if statement is true, what do I return? Is true. When this Boolean expression that I've highlighted inside the if statement is false, what do I return? False. The true falseness of what I'm returning is the same as the true falseness of what's in this if statement, which means I can actually just do this. And this works. Now this feels pretty zen. I think this feels really, really zen. I want to say a couple things about this. First is that it is never the goal necessarily to get your code down to a single line. It's kind of nice. And I do think when you Boolean Zen well, it reads like English. Like here, when do I sleep in? Well, when it's a vacation or it's not a weekday, right? That just kind of works in the way that I want it to. We talk in this class sometimes about the quote unquote clever solution to a problem. And I would say maybe fully Boolean Zenning one of your questions kind of in a way is the clever solution if you kind of can come up with the one-line solution to one of these Boolean problems. But that doesn't mean it's necessary to do. By doing this Boolean Zen stuff, I'm trying to get you to think about logic in a certain way. But that doesn't mean that every solution we had before we came to this one wasn't also valid. So just something to keep in mind. Let's actually take a second to write up what we're going to call the rules of Boolean Zen. Because I want to actually kind of type this out in a format that will make sense. So what was the first thing that we got to improve? Well, it was kind of that cascading if statement. That was a rule we already learned when we did the card class and card program. But what are the rules that actually made our Booleans very zen? I think the first one was this. When I have the expression x equals true inside an if statement, what can I actually just replace this with is just x. X equals true and x, assuming x is a Boolean, are the same thing. These are equivalent expressions. Now let's look at the other way. We had something like y equals false. What can I replace that with is actually bang y, right? Y equals false and bang y are equivalent Boolean expressions. And now my favorite one here, if I have something like if z, assuming z is a Boolean, return true, else return false. What can I replace this with is actually just return z. And I'm just going to bold all this because these are all together. So these are kind of my 3 rules of Boolean Zen. And we're going to combine these to actually Boolean Zen a bunch of different problems over the course of the next video.